It's fair to say that the mid-90s was something of a golden age for video games. The same can't really be said for movies, however. With a few exceptions, most of the big blockbusters that came out at that time were frankly embarrassing. Sitting alongside such stinkers as Waterworld, Judge Dredd and Batman Forever, Dragonheart released to unenthusiastic reviews and was almost immediately forgotten by the poor sods who paid to see it, myself included. Also, much like the maligned contemporaries I mentioned, Dragonheart spawned a couple of licensed video games to prey on the 10 to 12 year olds who inevitably thought it was the best thing they'd ever seen. Also myself included. Yes, in my childhood naivety, I decided it would be a good idea to ask my dad to buy me Dragonheart for the Game Boy. And, perhaps more surprisingly, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit back then. After rewatching the film on TV recently, I decided that now would be a good time to revisit the Game Boy game to see if there's any magic there. The story follows the same plot as the film, although it's been somewhat simplified. Set in the grubby Middle Ages, our hero Bowden is a dragon slayer for hire. Once the mentor of the now tyrannical and hated King Einon, Bowden travels the kingdom in search of dragons to slay. Bowden's quest is one of revenge, as he blames a dragon for corrupting the once innocent king's heart. Einon had been mortally wounded as a child, but saved by the magic of a dragon. Although miraculously spared, his character changed as he aged, until he became an absolute unbearable prick. Bowden vows revenge on all dragonkind, and gladly takes any opportunity to undermine the evil king and his minions along the way. Developed by Taurus Games and published by Acclaim, Dragonheart released for the Game Boy in the summer of 1996. Right around the time of the Game Boy Pocket launch in fact. For that reason, it's always been one of the games I most strongly associate with the Pocket. It was certainly one of, if not the first game I played on mine, but that's by the by. Dragonheart is best described as a first-person adventure game, with point-and-click elements and 2D action combat. It's quite unlike anything else on the Game Boy really, and quite impressive in that regard. Taking place over 8 missions, each stage begins outdoors where Bowden must first explore his surroundings. The first person movement is surprisingly smooth and fluid for a Game Boy title. By using the D-pad you can move Bowden forwards and backwards in real time. Pressing left or right will cause him to turn on the spot 90 degrees, allowing you to change direction. Although each step is essentially just loading a static background image, the frames load just about fast enough to make you feel like you're walking around in a 3D environment. You'll see NPCs walking around too, and the odd dragon flying in the distance to help the illusion. Like I said, it's quite an impressive sight to see on the Game Boy. In each area there will be the aforementioned NPCs milling about, one of whom will always be Brother Gilbert. Played by the late great Pete Postlethwaite in the film, try saying that 5 times fast, Gilbert follows Bowden around as a sort of medieval groupie. He rarely offers much insight, but it's nice to see one of England's finest character actors rendered in 8-bit. Other NPCs you'll encounter tend to be harmless peasants of some sort, but who are often relevant to the quest somehow. One chastises you for walking over his turnip field, but then gladly hands one over when you profess to being a bit of an admirer of the plump root veg. Another has a bucket stuck on his head. Also in each area there'll be a few cottages and a town to explore. By walking around and talking to the various NPCs, the objective of the mission will become clear. It's all pretty familiar stuff for anyone who's played a point-and-click adventure before. It involves lots of fetch quests and dialogue options, but thankfully for the most part there's nothing too obtuse here. It's all pretty logical and easy to figure out. A wooden fence blocks the path? Better find an axe. An unhelpful punter in the pub? Better buy him a drink. One particularly egregious example though involves a tale of 2 long-lost brothers. Bowden is captured and thrown in a dungeon for his transgressions against the king. There he meets a crazed peasant who tells him how to escape. In exchange, Bowden must return a toy wooden pony to the man's brother, whom he hasn't seen in 20 years. Sure enough, Bowden escapes, fighting his way through numerous guards, and dutifully finds the house of the brother. Before he can utter a word, however, the grumpy old git sends Bowden packing in search of a bowl of oatmeal, refusing to speak until his belly is filled. After asking around, Bowden finds someone willing to spare some oats and returns to the brother to complete the favour. The man, however, then throws a tantrum because there's no sugar to go with it. Now, I'm no historian, but I'm guessing that sugar was something of a luxury item back in the Middle Ages. Not the sort of thing you'd get pissy about with some random good Samaritan who's just brought you a free breakfast. Nevertheless, Bowden returns to the poor sod who lent him the oats and asks for some sugar. Now with a breakfast that probably cost about 100 quid in today's money, he returns to the old man to finally deliver the toy and share the good news of his long lost brother. At last, the old man seems grateful as he clasps the cherished childhood toy and asks how he can repay this kind act. Bowden asks only one thing in return, to be escorted to the forest where he needs to save a lost child from the clutches of a dragon. The old man replies, "It's too hot and I'm too old to take you there, sorry." At this point, I desperately wanted a dialogue option that involved the old git becoming acquainted with the pointy end of Bowden's sword. Speaking of the pointy end of swords, combat in Dragonheart is played out in the style of a 2D fighting game. It reminds me of the classic game Karateka, in that you can attack and block at different heights, high, mid and low. Fighting human opponents involves trying to exploit the openings in their defence whilst trying to predict where they're going to attack you back. At least that's how it should be. Sadly, or mercifully depending on how interested you are in the combat, the most viable strategy seems to be repeatedly hacking away at their legs until they die. Brutal. At the end of each stage though, after a bit of a maze-like walk through the forest, Bowden must come face to face with his arch enemy, a dragon. Here the ham-fisted strategy that works on human opponents won't cut it. The dragons will spit fireballs from a distance and bite at close range, both inflicting hefty damage. In these battles, patience is the name of the game. Bowden must use his shield wisely and wait for the right moments to strike, never succumbing to the temptation to overcommit. A lot is at stake in these fights, as dying here will require the entire stage to be started again from the beginning. And you know what that means. Going to get more oats for that ungrateful old bastard, and that ain't happening. The dragon fights are actually quite fun when you get the hang of the required timings to take them down. It's more of a puzzle than anything, as you can dictate their method of attack with your range. Ultimately, each stage in Dragonheart plays out in roughly the same way. Explore a big field, visit a town, complete a couple of quests, have a couple of fights, and then take a trip to the forest to slay a dragon. The story does try and keep the gameplay feeling fresh, but Dragonheart does start to feel tedious before long. Nevertheless, there's plenty of memorable characters and scenarios to encounter along the way. It's a game that's best played over several sessions by not tackling more than 1 or 2 stages at a time. Thankfully, there's a short password system to pick up where you left off from. It's not exactly the most exciting game in the world, but Dragonheart still feels impressive for the system, and it stands out as something quite unique in the Game Boy library. So, if you like what you've heard, why not seek out a copy of Dragonheart for your Game Boy? It's a characterful adventure through the murky Middle Ages, where you'll help peasants fight soldiers and slay dragons. And, if nothing else, it's a lot more noteworthy than the film. Thanks for watching.